My name is Stefan. I'm the president of the Institute for Greater Europe. That's a youth-led think tank with young academics from Europe and even beyond. And today we'd like to watch onto European issues from a quite different angle, taking the Catholic Church as a normative and political actor in the European bubble to think about what are European values and how can these European values be seen, especially from a Christian and a Catholic perspective. And for that purpose, we are quite happy and very privileged to have Mr. Lunte with us today. Mr. Lunte, he studied theology and history in Münster and then also political science in Paris. Since 1996, he's already part of the COMECE, which is the European Conference of Catholic Bishops, and since 2001, he fulfills the position as Secretary General for Justice and Peace in Europe. Apart from that, Mr. Lunte calls himself European by heart and Catholic for life. In that position, he was also a very diligent observer and contributor to the Conference on the Future of Europe, and we're happy to discuss with him today about what kind of role did the Thanks a lot, Mr. Lunte, that you're here with us. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefan Raab. Thank you for the invitation. I didn't get the last few words of your introduction, but I think that's all right and all fine. I'm speaking to you from my hometown in France, where I live for many years now. I am scheduling, I'm shuttling back and forth between Brussels and this place here in the middle of France. It gives me a lot of time to reflect and to think in the trains about this European project, which I've been accompanying since 1996, as you said. I started there as a quite young man at the time, having finished my studies for political sciences in Paris and theology in Münster, as you said. Very enthusiastic about the European project. You must also understand that these years from 1990 to 2000 or even 2005 were extremely enthusiastic moments of the European integration process. And I will come back to that because at the end of my presentation, I will try to, also to be honest with myself, with the church organization I work with, and also with the European Union project as such. But as you asked me to speak about the European values and the conference and to explore through two lines the relevance of these values, you asked me to speak about the conference on the future of Europe I've been following, and also the Article 7 procedures against, actually currently against two countries, Poland and Hungary, also to address this issue because it is clearly in line with the question of the European values. The importance of common European values in the process of Europe is that they stand at the beginning. They do not only stand at the beginning, and here you start sharing perhaps the little presentation I prepared. At the beginning of the European project in the 1950s, it was people, of persons, of personalities who were all connected by a certain number of values they found important. Peace, of course, but also justice, but also democracy, and so on. And today it stands at the beginning of the European project as such, insofar as the Article number 2 of our European Treaty is about the values of the European Union. You see these values: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. And then in a second wave, there are also added pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between woman and man. Here you have the text of the Article 2 of the European Union Treaty. Very important treaty. Of course, I remember fine well this period in the around the European Convention that started in 2005 and then led to the Lisbon Treaty. The discussions we had about this article, how important it was also from our perspective as church office to include, for instance, the respect for human dignity as a foundational value, that it stands at the very beginning of the list. It's followed then that each person has its dignity, followed by the value of freedom, democracy, and so on. I will not reread the list. So where do we stand with these values? Are these values part of the current reflection about the European Union? Yes, of course. And they are very often at the core of the difficulties we currently see in the European Union project. I will come back to that later. But first of all, let us say that we had this extraordinary exercise, which was called the Conference on the Future of Europe. And the values of the European Union always came back and back and back in the discussions of those who were attending this conference. There were representatives of the different European institutions in this conference, but also representatives of the civil society who made a very lively input in the debates and discussions. I put together a short chronology for you so that you see where this all led to. And I must say that whilst it started as an effort to bring more direct democracy into the European Union itself, since from the very beginning, there was a concentration on the question whether we need to have another convention, another reform of the treaties of the European Union. Much of this debate was focused on that. So it led into a dead end, I must say. We had on the 9th May this year, we had the presentation of the final report of this Conference of the Future of Europe, 49 proposals, 300 measures, really an effort and a very impressive listing and lineup of ideas and proposals of what to do in such fields like democracy, migration, the fight against climate change, the economy, and so on. But on the same day, this report was welcomed, for instance, like by President Macron from France, but also by Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission. She also took up already the idea to integrate more citizens' debates into the legislative process of the European Union. That's fine, but that's what I wanted to say. Already on May 9, there were already 13 member states who clearly indicated that they do not want another institutional reform. They underlined that the modification of the treaty has never been an objective of the conference. So all the talk about values, but the effort to get perhaps more democracy into the European Union got a mixed welcome from those who are the key players in the European Union, continue to be the key players, which are the member states. As church, to say that as Catholic Church, we welcomed the Conference on the Future of Europe. We made, as was said, a number of inputs. We regretted that we were not invited to be an observer, like other similar institutions. But what was foreseeable, we already foresaw this as well, that there is a lot of tension within the European Union, which has developed in the last 10 years, and even more so. We foresaw that if we focus and concentrate immediately on another institutional reform, we will run into big difficulties. That was foreseeable. It happened like that. On June, the European Parliament called clearly for a revision of the treaties. The Council of the European Union takes note of the European Parliament's resolution. When you, in diplomatic language, speak about taking note, it says it's a no deal, and doesn't. You do not really want to respond positively to that. And although Mrs. von der Leyen also put all her weight, political weight, behind this idea, when in the State of the Union address in the European Parliament, she said that she was in favor of convening a new convention, the governments remain very skeptical. There are some big governments like France and Germany and Spain who also want such a new reform of the treaties, always in the view of strengthening the values of the European Union. So these big governments, they are in favor, but most of the smaller governments, and that we need to understand this also with regard to history, they are quite opposed to it. All the countries from the Central and Eastern Europe are against it, also the Nordic countries. The last development was that the German government declared informally yesterday that for them there is a Junktim, a link between the enlargement process, and that's a highly political issue, with the recent admission of Ukraine among the candidate countries and Moldova. That there is no enlargement process without institutional reform. The next point, so this is to say the first line of reflection I wanted to offer to you, that the European Union values are strongly anchored in the Treaty of the European Union, but the effort to give them more visibility through the Conference on the Future of Europe has had a mixed result. The next point is the Article 7 procedure to protect European values. And here we speak about the situation when there is the concern that one member state does no longer respect the European values. And therefore, the Treaty of the European Union foresees in its Article 7 a procedure that shall ensure that all European Union countries respect the common values of the European Union. And there are different ways to launch this procedure. It can be done by the Commission, it can be done by the Parliament, it can be done also by a certain number of member states. They say, we want to trigger this Article 7 procedure. First, it was launched in 2017 against Poland, about overhandling of its judicial system and many other problems. And then the European Parliament did the same against Hungary for breaking rules and values in 2018. What happened since? You all have heard about the interrogations in media about and in politics about the way Hungary and Poland respect or do not respect European values, and there are certainly reasons to question this. And how did now this procedure work out? First of all, Poland. The main cause of concern was the dismissing of judges in the judicial system because they were critical, is said, of the government. This dismissal was suspended by the Court of European Justice, and the European Commission, this is then part of the procedure, ordered a fine of 1 million per day, but And there we have the problem within the European Union. They just don't decide, the Polish government decided not to pay. So we are about over 150 million euros today without payment, and we do not see any solution, with the exception that today a Polish, it was just today, a Polish tribunal court reinstated a judge who was dismissed. And so what may be the outcome is that especially the national judicial system had enough strength and force in itself to restore a normal procedure. The procedure in Hungary, is long-standing, doesn't advance at all. There were already 5 hearings of the Hungarian government in the council, the last one on 18 November. But I will tell you something. At the end of the day, if it comes to sanction a member state on behalf of this Article 7 procedure, you need unanimity. And this means, since 2 governments are parallel under interrogation, under this procedure, it's sufficient that each of these 2 governments vetoes the procedure of the other one, and which means that the procedure will lead to nothing. So what else can be done? What else can be done to restore and to strengthen European values in the system? There is a new idea came up already in 2018, since one understood quite early at the side of the European Commission that such a procedure of Article 7 would have its limits, as I just described. So they brought into the discussion a regulation, a European law, about a conditionality regarding the rule of law. And that's, of course, an important point. It does not cover everything, but at least the respect for the law and procedures in a juridical system is covered by this regulation. First of all, the proposal for this legislation was blocked in the council again, but in the aftermath of the pandemic, the immediate pandemic at the end of 2020, the European Council and the Parliament agreed on such a regulation. And although it was first again challenged by the European Court in the European Court of Justice by Hungary and Poland, the court ruled in favor of the instrument in mid-February. So and the Commission published its guidelines regarding this regulation. So it is it can be enforced, and there is the possibility to condition the disbursement of parts of the EU budget to the respect of the rule of law. And this is, of course, a very strong argument if there are billions of euros which are not paid out because you are not in line with the standards for the rule of law in Europe. You have a problem, and that's what's happening. First of all, and that was really a very groundbreaking event when on a Sunday morning, 15 September, the colleagues of the Commission, all the commissioners gathered in Brussels to decide that they would adopt a report that Poland could no longer, that they decided to suspend 1/3 of the cohesion funds that were allocated to Hungary if its reforms efforts remain insufficient in the coming 2 months. That was a very clear announcement. Hungary had submitted beforehand a number of measures to respond to the griefs of the European Commission, but the Commission on this date, on 18th September, decided not to react to that. And there we are at the moment. The Commission is considering whether finally, with some amendments, it can live with these proposals from Hungary. But the final decision again is with the Council, and they will have until 19 December, so it's quite in the next few weeks, that via a qualified majority voting, that means 15 member states that represent at least 65% of the total EU population, agree on suspending these funds. This would be a groundbreaking decision. You imagine what that means for a country like Hungary under the current difficulties with respect to the energy crisis. So we can only hope that we will find an agreement and that Hungary is will not become a victim of this measure or object of such a measure. But that means also that the Hungarian government must still make some moves. So this was what I wanted to tell you about the two vectors that were proposed to me, and I allowed myself to add another vector, which is perhaps less known, but which also belongs to the European values. The European Media Freedom Act is certainly an important new development, which I wanted to bring to your attention. Media freedom is, of course, a fundamental principle and value for Europe. We have all become aware of the difficulties in some member states to promote media pluralism, media independence across Europe. And therefore, the European Commission published a proposal. It's always that the Commission has to propose something for a European Media Freedom Act. That was in last September. The idea is to prevent political interference in editorial decisions, ensure transparency of media ownership. This is very important, of course. And to look at media concentration in member states. And then there is there are some articles regarding the protection of journalists, that they don't have to disclose their sources, and that they are protected against the use of spyware. And then there is the final also part concerning media content, that it's not unjust. There are measures to prohibit that there is unjustified online content removal. So that's a proposal. We are at the beginning with this law, European law. The European Parliament and Council have now designated their responsible committees, working parties, and then the legal procedure will start. The Parliament will propose its position on this, will decide on this position on this law. The Council will decide on its position on this law, legal proposal. They will have the dialogue. The Commission will come in, and then it's called a trilogue. The three will discuss. And all kinds of stakeholders will intervene and try to discuss with MEPs, with the governments, with the Commission, and so does also an office like ours, the Commission of the European Bishops' Conference of the European Union, makes its proposals, discussions to be heard normally in meeting with MEPs or other representatives of other institutions. We are about 12 collaborators working in Brussels, each with a specific sector to cover. We do this quite openly, no, not very openly, transparently, in a way that everything is published online on our website or on our Twitter account, we of course do not do this on our own behalf, but we do this on behalf of the European bishops. each bishops' conference in the European Union sends one bishop to our commission. They meet twice a year and give general orientations. Then there are sub-commissions who work in different fields and areas. They meet and they decide on guidelines. The Secretary General, now a Spanish priest at the moment, makes sure that there is an overall coherence to what we do. There is also a representation of the Holy See in Brussels, the Vatican. A new nuncio has just recently been appointed. He is from Northern Ireland. He was a bishop of Belfast, down in Connacht, and he will be in Brussels as the new nuncio from the end of January, I suppose. We had another nuncio. The previous nuncio suddenly died of COVID. He was a very popular man in the Catholic European scene. Aldo Giordano, Italian priest, archbishop, who had been nuncio before in other countries, and he suddenly died. So that's where we stand. I have a final slide to offer to you. Just a few questions, a few interrogations that are my own questions. So what has happened to the European Union? When you look at the last 25 years, there are major initiatives to reinforce the power of the European Union compared to the power of the member states. And it can be said that it was always done with a lot of good intentions. And that's the typical Christian, or may I say human experience. You do start to do something with the best intentions, and then there are suddenly side effects which become big problems. And that's what has happened to the European Union as well in the last 25 years. You had, for instance, the Schengen Agreement, the Schengen freedom, I call it here. It allows us to travel back and forth. But the side effect is that we need also, when you agree on this freedom of movement, you need an agreement about how to deal with the right of asylum. Without this agreement on the right of asylum, the whole business of free movement becomes a problem, because the temptation, the logic is then very, very big, that all candidates will try to get to that country, that member state, where they perceive to have the biggest chances to receive asylum status. But there is no agreement, and this is part of that's the cause of huge ongoing conflict between member states, in the European Parliament, and in the member states, but also with the European Commission. First example. The second, Euro unity. The European Union has a common currency. It's an enormous sign of strength and of trust of member states in each other, that they are agreeing of sharing the sovereignty about money, monetary policy. Incredible, unseen, nearly unseen in history. But it also implied that there is a sort of collective discipline in order to remain the trustworthiness of the money, that there is a sort of collective behavior with regards to fiscal discipline. This hasn't happened. It led to a serious debt crisis in the European Union. There was the problem with Greece, as you all remember, and it has led to a form of reawakening of resentment, prejudges among Europeans. And this we need to take into account, that we wanted the good, and it provoked in the end for a sort of renaissance of very strong resentment. There is still a very strong resentment, would say that only that, in Greece against against Germany. There is a strong resentment to give an example, in Slovakia against Greece. Why should Slovakia, which had a lower income per habitant than Greece, why should Slovakia help Greece? So this is very strongly anchored now, and again in the consciousness and mentality of people. At least that's my impression, that we had a good intention with a bad effect. Enlargement and peace, I could add that we enlarged, yes, but we couldn't completely pacify the European continent. To start with the first, with the difficult situation on the southern, on the Western Balkans, but also we see now the big war that Russia engaged against Ukraine. Common market equality. The idea of the common market is that we had to have a very prosperous European Union, and it brought a lot of prosperity. The freedoms, the 4 freedoms, are the basic principles of the common market, allowed many people to prosper. But what we see also is that there is a geographical movement in Europe from the south to the north and from east to the west. And there are many territories in Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe, in Spain and Italy, who feel left behind. And they accuse the European Union of being at the origin of this. And finally, I could also add something about the procedure that led to the Lisbon Treaty and to democracy. The Treaty of Lisbon is about more democracy for the Europeans, no doubt about that. More democratic representation, more power for the European Parliament, but we came there at the very high price. In several of our member states, the ratification process for a new treaty went wrong. In France, in the Netherlands, in Ireland, people voted no, and they experienced that their no was not heard, which is true, as a matter of fact. So there again, we have a lot of Europeans who mistrust and distrust the European Union because of this experience. It's still very lively, at least in the country where I live, in France, but also certainly in other member states, that people do not feel heard. And that's, of course, a very bad sign and for democracy. So these are my observations about good intentions, negative side effects. I wanted to stir discussion among ourselves by telling this, and to end up on a very positive note. I nevertheless also observed that the European Union and its member states cooperate surprisingly well when they are under threat, when there is a serious problem showing up. And I just give 4 examples. The European debt crisis I already spoke about. There were solutions which will make it impossible that such a crisis as the Greek debt crisis will repeat. There is and has been a very strong common response to the COVID-19 pandemic, also with regard to the war in Ukraine. And final remark, I understand and I sympathize and I agree largely with many people who say we do not enough to fight against climate change. But I think, for the record, it must be said also that since 2018, 2019, never has there been any such important movement of legal movement, political movement at the level of the European Union to respect the engagement of Paris, to respect the idea of or the aim of climate neutrality in 2050, and to have a reduction of 55% of greenhouse gas emissions until 2030. Everything that is discussed under the Fit for 55 package at the level in the European Commission, in the European Parliament, European Council now, it is, with all reservations one may have, it is an impressive piece of legislation that is on the way there. Not everything satisfies us, as we say at the level of our COMECE church office. We are unhappy that things do not go faster, not far enough, but we must also acknowledge that a lot is done, a lot of is already done. And that's what I wanted to say at the end as a sort of positive conclusion to a more negative analysis in the first part. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Lunte, for this presentation. And of course, if you want, you can show a round of applause with your reaction buttons. Philippe is a great role model on this. Thanks for these great insights into the concept of European values. And what we can see quite clearly, the European values are often taken for granted, but often they have to be defended. And especially thanks also for the last slide, bringing up lots of critical points and some crises that the European Union is currently facing. And this brings us to our lovely audience here. If you have any questions from Mr. Lunte, you can ask them either by raising your hand or on the other side, just putting them in the chat. And we already have the first question given by Mr. Lefebvre.
Hi there, taking sort of the benefit of being the co-organizer. You mentioned a bit about how the conference was not seen as a treaty reform conference, which I followed it myself from the AS. It's a good point there. However, let's say tomorrow there's a treaty reform. What are some things that you would want to see in a new treaty, or you'd want to see institutionalized to better protect European values? That's sort of a question for you. What would you like to see? And maybe you criticized a bit on sort of Article 7, so is there a way to improve that? So that's my question. And thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. I think in line with many European citizens, I would certainly be very happy if we come to a more stronger European identity with regard to external relations, security, defense. And there we have the unanimity clause, which is really an obstacle. It is, but it's on this first point, it is of course not only a problem of the treaty, it is a problem of trust among member states. We have this European Defence Fund, we have these initiatives to reinforce cooperation projects with regard to defense technologies. We see that still only 18% of all projects are cooperative. So that means that several member states work together. And that means also on the other side that there is a reservation and not enough trust, say that way, between member states to go further, and so therefore they keep their systems, which leads to a multiplication of systems, of planes, of tanks, of arms of all kind. And this is, of course, certainly a regrettable waste. That's one point. I also see that there needs to be a reflection about the core institution when it comes to reform. the core institution at the European level, the most original institution, remains the European Commission. We all have sympathies for the European Parliament. We understand the needs of the Council, but the core institution is the European Commission. The European Commission has the monopoly, with a few exceptions, to propose laws and regulation. Without an initiative of the European Commission, nothing happens. It gives it a very strong, powerful position, as you can imagine. And the Commission formally adopts a proposal by the majority of its members, not of the civil servants, but of the commissioners. For the moment, we have a solution that each member state has one commissioner. If we go to a situation, if we go on with the current situation for, let's say, European Union of 35 member states, and we have added on some countries from the Western Balkans, like Macedonia, North Macedonia, Albania, Montenegro, Bosnia, and they all have one commissioner. We have a country like Moldova. You add on another bunch of member states who have a relatively small population, and it will give the small country a huge power in this core institution, which is the European Commission. If they come together, bigger member states who have 65 million inhabitants, population of 80 million, and they see that member states with only a few 100,000 population will also have the same power within the European Commission. I stress perhaps a bit too much, but that's something which I find it's a core problem. We would need some equilibrium in order to maintain the sentiment of a large vast of the population in these big states that their country, their nationality, their nation is still represented in a sufficient and acceptable way. That would be, for me, a key proposal. A key question. No? I have no idea how to resolve it. But
well, if it were that simple, it would have been done. But thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Are there any questions from the audience so far? Otherwise, I'd have a question, especially from my experience working as the German Conference of Bishops at the moment. On the one side, we can see that this kind of identity politics is coming up, like people and even political institutions are searching who we are, who we want to be. On the other side, many people are leaving the church in Germany. Like every time you read quite lots of negative headlines about the church. How do you think the role of religion, the Catholic Church within, and the European Union should develop in the future? What kind of role should the Catholic Church play within the European Union? Thinking it's a secular project, but it's also a project based on lots of values.
Well, the role should be modest. One should accept the modesty of our contribution today. Whilst we have a quite well-functioning office in Brussels, we need to recall all the time that for many people, I speak of the Catholic faith is no longer a driver in their life, in their personal life, and we have to take that into account. And I think such an attitude of modesty may allow us, nevertheless, to make contributions where we may be accepted as sort of experts in the long term. The Catholic Church with a structure remains the institution that has the longest run through European history compared to all other institutions. There is certainly this perspective that we can become a sort of advocates of the long term more than before, with some credibility if we keep it modest.
That's a good point, like getting a little bit more the limits of your own actions, getting aware that the situation is changing. Maybe what could be quite interesting, at least getting a little bit from the political more to the religious and spiritual side. How do you observe might religion have changed since the 1990s when there was this enlargement of the European Union? Is religion still a factor in European politics, thinking, for instance, about Poland, thinking about Hungary, but also about Russia? And could the church be something like, as you mentioned, an advocate, like a mediator, bringing East and West closer together?
So certainly that's a role we can also play, and I can witness from my own experience, my work in the office in Brussels, the Office of Secretariat of COMECE. We are 8 nationalities for a team of 13 people from all parts of Europe. This is helpful to have this on a day-to-day basis. Bishops meet at the level of COMECE also twice a year for several days. This also helps to bridge cultural misunderstandings or to improve the cultural understanding. The church has certainly a role to play. Yeah, I can only subscribe to this. But then we need also be proactive in bringing such gatherings to fore, and we need to for instance, I know that from Germany you have perhaps another perspective. You have the synodal way in Germany, but the synod on synodality is certainly also has a potential, a positive potential for the church in Europe, and it has some openings I see will be possible. If we get at the European level to a more synodal style, that means that the Commission of Bishops' Conferences becomes a commission of churches, where also men and women who are not bishops sit at the table and take part in discussion. That could be a positive and good sign to develop.
Thanks for these insights as well. I just keep on encouraging the audience to ask some questions. Otherwise, we continue. Philippe, you have a question you'd like to raise? Okay.
I do, if you would like me to. Maybe
if you want, please,
on...
I'd like to give you the chance as well.
Of course. I mean, I was wondering if you'd reflect a little bit on, obviously, the Catholic Church in Europe has a very different relationship to society compared to in Africa, for example, and South America, where it's still quite a dominant, quite a dominant force in everyday life. And I wonder, in your day-to-day, how often do you talk to sort of these other organizations representing Catholicism in other countries? Are there things you kind of share in how you work with society and politics? And I'd just maybe like to hear a bit about your external relations kind of with churches around the world.
Yeah, that's something which we have been trying to do for many years, and we continue to work on this. We have welcomed an impressive delegation of American bishops to come to Brussels. We were in discussion with them. We had a huge congress in 2000s already with the bishops of Latin America, with CELAM. We are planning, because next year I think there is another summit of Latin America EU summit, and we prepare to shadow that, or to accompany that by also a church summit again between European and Latin American church leaders, and the same, not in the same same importance numbers, but more regularly we have contacts with CECAM, that is the it's a sort of conference of African bishops' conferences. There we have quite good contacts established, and we have been working on different issues together with them. Yeah, it's a bit less, I must say. But it's not so. We had some contacts, but it's more on an individual basis with the FABC, the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences. But we have, of course, been in touch with people, and now I speak more of my activity as Secretary General of Justice and Peace Europe, of people who support or who are following the evolution and developments in Hong Kong, and who have been in contact with these people, Catholics from Hong Kong, who have been enduring quite a hard time and still do. The whole situation was brought to the European Parliament, which also adopted a few resolutions. Cardinal Joseph Zen, of course, but also others. Yeah, we tried. But it's not so fully covered like the other in the other regions of the world. But it's a part of our work. Yeah.
And sorry if I could just interject with a follow-up. So that's obviously for Catholic other organizations, and if I may be so bold, other religions as well. I mean, is there quite constant interfaith dialogue too, staying where you sort of share values in Europe? In the UK, I mean, just today it was revealed that I think for the first time a majority of people did not identify as Catholic, but an increasing number identified as practicing Islam as a faith, and obviously Judaism. So I just wondered maybe a bit on the interfaith aspect.
Yes, good and strong relations with the Jewish community in Brussels and their representatives. Yes, to be honest, the discussions with the Muslims is not always easy, not because of contents, but of the inherent structure of Islam, where you have no hierarchy. You don't know with whom you speak, and if someone speaks, we never really not always sure of how many people he represents. So does he speak for someone? Does he speak for him alone? This is a bit of a difficulty we are facing, but that we try. Then there is we have good contact with the Baha'i. Yes. They are present in Brussels. Good contacts also with the Quaker people community. So yes, that's part of our work, to be in contact with these communities, of course.
Right. It's great to hear. Do a good job of connecting everyone. That's fantastic. That's what we like to hear about in Greater Europe as well.
Yeah, but yeah, that's part of the work. Yeah. And also, of course, because we speak here about the Catholic Church, but we also have several representatives of different Orthodox churches in Brussels, be it from Cyprus, from Greece, Romania. The Russian Orthodox people are here. That's more to run a bit cold now, the relations, but so that's of course present, and of course also with the Protestant Reformed churches and the Anglicans.
The Anglicans, of course.
Of course.
Being British and French, we're going to remember the Anglicans. Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe Stefan, a final question from you, and unless there are any other questions on the chat, I don't see any, but it's been a great discussion already.
Well, then I think basically I have two questions I'd like to ask at the end, because what I always find quite interesting, the church, there might be crisis, but it's connecting people all over the world. We've been talking about the exchange with Africa, with Latin America, and now for the first time in history, we have a Pope who calls himself coming from the margins of the world, like from Latin America. And he's
Mm.
currently changing this whole system of the church, which was mostly focused on Europe, where most of the cardinals were located. How do you think does this affect the work, your work, or the work of the Catholic Church in Europe in general as well? Will there be a change of focus?
Mm. At the beginning, we were apprehending this a little bit, in inverted commas, and we discovered that the Pope Francis had a steep learning curve with respect to the European Union, at least. I do not think that it was really on his radar screen so much before, and he, but also his closest collaborators, are hugely interested in what we are doing and what's happening in Brussels, because we could have spent an evening talking about digitalization. The importance of the European Union remains huge when it comes to topics like digitalization. We have the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act. They have been adopted. They set standards globally. They have impressed these huge players we need to face today. We need to break up their monopolies. We may need to globalize instead of nationalize actors like Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple in the future, because they have become so powerful. So you need a very strong agent to address these global actors. I think the Pope has understood that there is reason for being in disagreement with what the European Union does sometimes, but there is also there are good reasons to support and to take an interest in what is being done at the level of the European Union. The climate change is obviously another example. It is easier to discuss with the European Union and China. And the digital aspect factor, of course, obviously as well. So I think it is good and important that we have a church which is from its center much more attentive than never before to the margins. And this is, of course, also a call for our own existence as Catholics. How do we do this in our daily life? But I think it's also helpful to be attentive to the realities in Europe and to maybe use it for a better world.
Yeah, and this better world brings us to my final questions. We started with talking about norms and values. And in your presentation, you showed us that these kind of European values often in some kind of danger, so they have to reinforce, and this European spirit has to be revived in the minds of the people. So my final question is quite simple. What is your wish for the European project facing 2030?
Facing 2030. First of all, I wish that we come good through this winter, and that the European spirit, the flame of the European spirit, will not get a serious shock by the forthcoming months. And then I hope for 2030, obviously, that we will be in a clear perspective of integrating the countries I mentioned before, including in the Ukraine, We will not be there to be ready there, but we'll have a clearer perspective. We will have a strong feeling of our European conscience among in the young generation. This is certainly something which in the country where I live is missing today. We have the key part of voters for the Front National in France are young people, people be under 30. So that's certainly something which I would like to see as well. And finally, yeah, I'm hoping for pacified relations with Russia.
So that's a great final words for this evening. So we thank you once again, Mr. Lunte, that you joined us today. And thanks for all these people who participated this evening. If there are any further questions, or if you're interested in more of our events of the Institute for Greater Europe, follow us on LinkedIn and social media. And we hope to see you at another event. And once again, thank you for this great cooperation with the COMECE. Let's hope that we all get good through the winter, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. And I thank you for the initiative. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Okay.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And a wonderful Christmas too.
Thank you. Yes, good.
One second.
Yeah.
Cool. That was good.
It was quite good.